Welcome to Lifeline Baptist Church Sunday evening Bible study. Tonight we're in John the 4th chapter. You can turn in your Bibles to John chapter 4. I'm not only going to talk about the text of chapter 4, but I'm going to talk about these questions that I brought up with you last week about who, what, when, where, why, and how. And there's going to be a lot of I'm going to show you some pictures on where and talk about when. The text starts off about Jesus leaving Judea for Galilee, going through Samaria. When Jesus realized that the Pharisees were aware he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus who baptized but his disciples, he left Judea and returned to Galilee. Now he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Since Jacob's well was there, Jesus, weary from his journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. Well, there's a lot of who, what, when, where, and why information in that bit of text right there, and so I'll spend some time here covering it. The destination, of course, is Galilee, but he's taking the road to Samaria. Anybody want to tell me whether he took the road through the Jordan Valley or down the Judean mountains? Anybody got a solution to that riddle? I don't think you'll find it in the text. But you come to the 4th chapter and the 4th verse, and Jesus is at the well, and it says he's resting. And the hour really calculates in modern time about noon. And so you can fairly well know that Jesus and his disciples got up early and hit the road while it was cool, and they've come to Sychar, which is a little better than halfway to the road to Galilee from Jerusalem. And so he's passing through Samaria, and he comes near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And so Jesus sat down about the 6th hour, about noon. Well, I've dropped back now to the when idea and where, and that is in Genesis 33:18. You read about Jacob, who comes to Shechem. After Jacob had come from Paddan Aram. Well, this is up there where Abraham had gone to the north, way up the source of the river. And so Jacob had come down from there with his wives that he had acquired while he was there. And he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in the land of Canaan. And he camped just outside the city. And the plot of ground where he pitched his tent, he purchased from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver. And there he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Well, notice that Hamor is the one that was the owner of the place, and his son's name is Shechem. We're fixing to meet him again. I'm telling you this and going to tell you some more because Shechem historically appears as importantly in the history of the children of Abraham as any place in the Bible. Abraham camped there, and now Jacob has come back from up north, and he's camping there, and he has set up an altar there, and has given this property to his son Joseph, who was all but the Pharaoh of Egypt at the time. So here is a list of the historical texts, principally that have to do with Shechem. The first is Genesis 12. Abraham stops there and built an altar at Shechem. And then Jacob returns there after 20 years in Haran, up north, and he purchased land there. And he set up the altar. And then his daughter, Dinah, caught the eye of Shechem, the landowner's son, and they intimate that he didn't just only entice her, he raped her. And so the sons of Jacob took revenge on the Israelites, and they told them, well, if you'll be circumcised and join us, well, you can marry with our women and we'll marry with yours. And they said, okay. And so when they were sore from their operation, the sons of Jacob killed them. And so Jacob had to leave Shechem. And so he moved down to the area around Hebron. And so next is Joseph. And Joseph was sent by his father back to Shechem to find his brothers who were grazing their sheep up in the northern part in Samaria. And it's in Genesis 37 says that Joseph came to Shechem, and a fellow there says, oh no, they're not here. They've moved the flocks up to Dothan, or Dothan. And Dothan is on the gateway to Galilee through the mountains, through one of those passes I showed you. And so Joseph goes up to Dothan, and that's where they decide to do away with him and finally sold him into slavery to those traders that were going to Egypt. So that has to do with Shechem. Joseph then, when Jacob, now in Egypt, and this is while Jacob is still the second man to Pharaoh in Egypt, Jacob was dying, and on his deathbed he called in his sons and pronounced blessings on the ones according to their merit and to God's blessing and so forth. And he gave Joseph, he said, the land, the ridge, he said, I give you the ridge at Shechem that I took with my sword and my bow. Well, apparently they bought some of it and they conquered some of it. But anyway, Joseph inherited that. And later, Joseph made his people promise that when they came back to the land, that they would bury his bones in the land. And so they did, and that's at Shechem. And then when Joshua had made war and had conquered as much of the land as they could, and I think the Bible bears out that they didn't get it all. They just moved in and tolerated some things. But Joshua assembled the tribes of the Israelites at Shechem and made a covenant. And you find this in Joshua 24. And this is the place where he had the two mountains, Mount Ebal, which is called the Mount of Evil, and Mount Gerizim, the mountain of blessing, and he had a choir on each one. And he said, if you obey the Lord, he had the choir of blessing on Mount Gerizim sing the blessings. And then he said, but if you do not obey God, then he had the choir sing on Mount Ebal the curses upon them. And so he made a covenant at Shechem. And in Deuteronomy, you can read the story about how they were commanded to set up stones on Mount Ebal, and to not use any carving weapons or tools on the stones, but to use plaster and to carve the law of God on those stones. Well, I'm going to show you pictures of that in a minute. And then you have an incident in Judges chapter 9 of Gideon's son, and his name is not Abimelech, okay? Ab means son of, and Melech means king. His name is Abimelech, which is the son of the king, or the son of Gideon, that they call him. And Abimelech decided he wanted to be king, and he had all these multiple brothers, and he had them all killed, and he made himself king at Shechem, and the Shechemites went along with it for a while until they found out who he really was, and they turned on him. All that's in Judges, specifically in chapter 9. And then there's something that has happened between the testaments that's not in the Bible. It's in the Apocrypha, which was in the King James Bible when it first came out. The Apocrypha has in it the activities of the Maccabees, and one of the descendants of the Maccabees, John Hyrcanus, the one who made himself the high priest, who was in charge of the religious and religious affairs, and then king of Israel, which meant he was the head of the army and military and governmental affairs, and he made war on the Samaritans. And first he destroyed their temple on Mount Gerizim in 127 BC. Well, I'll show you pictures of that. And Jesus is sitting at the well where you can look up on that mountain and see the ruins. And Jesus and the woman at the well knew about these events. And by the way, John Hyrcanus wasn't satisfied with tearing down their temple, and about 7 years later he came back and destroyed the town of Shechem. And I don't think it's been inhabited since then. This is a view. Can you see the picture okay? I will attempt to magnify it some. All this stonework here is the steps that were leading up to the Samaritan temple up on the mountain. Can you see down below there? That is Shechem site. That is where the ruins are of Shechem. That's where Jacob's well is down there, and so forth. You remember that, well, I'll just read you some of the text of Deuteronomy 27. And on the day you cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, set up large stones and coat them with plaster. Write on them all the words of this law when you have crossed over to enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you. And when you have crossed the Jordan, you are to set up these stones on Mount Ebal, as I am commanding you today, and you are to coat them with plaster. Moreover, you are to build there an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones, and you must not use any iron tool on them. Well, there's Professor Brown and our group taking a look at a stone that they have dug up there at the place, and I'm not sure whether I should tell you that that's the stone or one like it or what. But I will go closer where you can see it. There's the stone, and that's been smoothed out, and I guess that was plaster work. And those stones you see behind there, that's the ruins of old Shechem. Those stone walls right there go back before the Iron Age, before the Jews. I thought I'd just throw this in. This is a writing of the Telemarna letters that were found in Egypt, and they date to 1350 years before Christ. And this is a letter from Labayu, the ruler of Shechem. Does that sound a little bit like Laban? Well, no, I'm not saying it was the same, but there's a similarity there, is there not? Labayu, the ruler of Shechem, and he wrote this to the Egyptian Pharaoh Amenhotep, or his son Akhenaten. I know y'all have heard of Akhenaten. There's a lot of Egyptian stuff being found that dates back to him, and this is in the 14th century before Christ. And this is found at a place called Tel Amarna, Egypt, and what you're looking at is in the British Museum. And that writing there is cuneiform writing, and it took scholars years and years, not only decades, but hundreds of years from the time that business was found. Well, it wasn't hundreds of years, but it's a long time, until they could decipher the writing, and they had to find a stone that had 3 languages on it to manage it. I think that's called the Rosetta Stone. I didn't tell you what's on it. It says that Sakmu, that is Shechem, was the center of a kingdom carved out by this Labayu, a Canaanite warlord who recruited mercenaries from among the Habaru. And of course, that is thought to represent the Hebrews, and they were furnishing him paid soldiers. Well, I think I'll show you this map again and call your attention to where the route that Jesus probably took. Can you see my cursor there at Jerusalem? Mm-hmm. All right, can you see the darker area there on the right up from Jerusalem? That's the wilderness on the backside of those mountains. You see this red line going to the top of the mountains or thereabout, up to Samaria. That's the road that Jesus would have taken if he left Jerusalem and went straight north. And the majority of scholars want to say that since he was baptizing down in the Jordan Valley, that he went that way. And so you see there a road from Jericho, the red line going up, and then you come to a place there which I've got my cursor on, and you turn to the left and go up in the mountains, and you see, can you see the word Shechem and Sychar right where my cursor is? So that is a trip. If he came through Jericho, it's a trip up into the mountains, and if he came from Jerusalem, it's a trip down the mountains. And you'll see what that means directly. Here's the student map that I've been showing you. And remember that this is an east view. The top of the map is not north. North is to your left. And again, you can see those mountains from Jerusalem. They go down to Jacob's well right here. I'll get straight in a minute. There is Sychar. Do you see that there is a set of mountains right there at the place? You remember me talking about Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim? Well, I'm going to clue you in on what all that means. As Jesus went down, if he went down the Jerusalem road, he went by the site of Shiloh. The reason that the Hebrew name for it is not Shiloh, it's Shiloh. But Shiloh is a place that helped start the controversy with the Samaritans and still is involved in the controversy between the Jews and Samaritans to this day. And that is, the Samaritans say that rump lying priest Eli removed the temple from Shechem and from Mount Gerizim and moved it up to Shiloh. And that's where the Jews said they had to worship. And the Samaritans have never believed that and have never worshiped there. As a matter of fact, they've never even been allowed to worship there. But that's the place about halfway between Jerusalem and Shechem. There's the view you get walking along the road. Can you see it's a high place up there? You just read in the Old Testament about all these high places where they worship and so forth. And here is something that the modern Hebrews, the citizens of Israel, have built. This is a synagogue modeled after the tabernacle. It's not where the tabernacle went. They won't build anything on that place. But this is at Shiloh. And this view is looking to the west, which means that the Jordan Valley is over on the other side of that mountain. This is the Jordan River Valley if Jesus went that way. And you can see that there's, down there in that valley, there's water and green. And up on the hillsides, it's barren because this, remember, is the wilderness. And the Yabok, the Jabbok, we would call it, river. Can you see where my cursor is right there? You see that's a big valley? When the scripture says that when the Jews conquered the land, they didn't take the Yabok because of the people that were living there. They made a treaty with them, or they bluffed them or something. That river comes, one of the sources is Amman, Jordan, which is back up here to the right top. And then it turns around back there. And those Ammonites, you catch the similarity between Ammon and the Ammonites. Well, the Ammonites were mighty enough and had that area fortified that the Jews didn't take it. But if Jesus came through this valley, he came to this area right here, which, if I'm not mistaken, you can see the place, by the way, the Old Testament place called Sukkot, or Sukkoth we would call it, but it's Sukkot. And this is where you turn left. You're walking north to the left of this picture, and then you turn left, which is toward the west, and start up in the mountains, and you come to Shechem. That's the wilderness route. Well, I'll get loose from this in a minute. I'll just zoom in and show you. You see the river right there. Now, I have a map here that's a terrain map, and the dark area is the high ground. And I thought I'd show you this so you'd get an idea not only of the ground at Shechem, but the strategic importance of it. This is why Abraham was interested in it. This is why Jacob was interested in it. This is why everybody's interested in it, even today. Do you see the light-colored land out there where my cursor is? That's a pass coming up from the Jordan River. Do you see the two tall mountains right there, and then there's a pass through them? You see all the roads converging on the place. If you have to defend a land, you defend a place like that and block all the roads and block all the passes. That's how battlefields are made normally. And so I'll go back and magnify that one more time. Do you see the two dark mountains? The one at the top of the map, that's the north, is Mount Ebal. And the one at the bottom right there of the town is Mount Gerizim, and Jacob's well is right there where the cursor is between the two. Any questions about the terrain and the importance of it? Well, there is a view that Jesus would have had if he was coming up from the Jordan River. On the right is Mount Ebal, and on the left is Gerizim, and right there in the valley is the site of Sychar and Jacob's well. By the way, Mount Gerizim is not the tallest of the two mountains. Can you read the numbers there? 2,881 feet in altitude for Gerizim and 3,084 for Mount Ebal. It's the biggest of the two mountains. This is the ancient ruins of Shechem right here. It's not all that view. Only reason I showed you this picture is because this is one that I made, and that's our class going up there from the well, and that's Dr. Ward in the white shirt and Dr. Brown leading the way. Those are our two scholars that taught us what's here. And that's Mount Gerizim up there, and Sychar is over here to our right in this picture. That's Mount Ebal, and Sychar, I'm not sure exactly where it is. I'm not sure that anybody does, but do you see all those trees where my cursor is? That's where there's water. And the scholars say that this woman that went from Sychar out to the well could have drawn water into town. But they're saying that because she was an outcast, she went out and drew water by herself. And it's about a half a mile to the left of this picture to the well. There's a view from Mount Gerizim. You see Mount Ebal on the left, and I'm going to highlight Shechem down there. See that bare place down there? That is the ancient ruins of Shechem. And can you see a steeple in a church right there where my cursor is, almost in the center of the picture? That is a church that they have built over Jacob's well. So, Shechem is here, Jacob's well is over there, and the green place over there is Sychar, supposedly where the woman walked from. Any questions about this so far?
Where did the woman come from in that picture? Where did she come from to the well?
All right, I'll go back. The question is, where did she come from to the well? All right.
Said the disciple had gone into the city to buy food.
All right. Can you see the cursor?
Yeah.
All right. That is the well.
Okay.
Now, you see my cursor moving to the right and to the north. That's the oasis up there. That where they had that would have been the settlement for them. So that's a half a mile on the ground.
Okay. Okay.
Got it now? Now, notice that Shechem is down here on the other side of the well from her. She didn't come from Shechem. She came from Sychar. Here's some more Old Testament scripture in Amos, the 4th chapter. Amos went down to Samaria and gave them his opinion of things, and they said, "Look here, fella, you're nothing but a picker of sycamore feeds. You go back home and preach up there, back up there where you came from." He came from a place that I was amused. It was called. It's near Musakar Aru, and that's an Arab settlement now, back on the other side of Hebron. Amos said, "Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husband, bring us some more to drink. The Lord God has sworn by his holiness, behold, the days are coming when you will be taken away with hooks, and your posterity with fish hooks." This prophecy was fulfilled in the year 722 BC when Samaria fell, and the 10 tribes of Israel who had separated themselves from Judea as a kingdom. Remember that Samaria started off being it was Israel, and it had the 10 tribes that rebelled against Solomon's son. When Solomon died, they had a meeting. By the way, it was at Shechem, and the 10 tribes had a kind of a coalition, and they said, "We want to know if you're going to oppress us like your father did and spend all that money like he did, our money that we earned, and you got it." And the son said he had some bad advisors. There was some poor rich kids that were raised, they never had to work, you can know that kind. And they advised him to be rougher, and so he told them, "If you think my daddy was rough, you ain't seen nothing." And so they said, "We're not going to put up with it," and they formed a kingdom at Samaria. And so that is the basis of the conversation, and that's not the only basis, but that is an important basis of why the Samaritans and the Jews don't get along till this day. Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, is the one that started all that conquest, and I had an Old Testament professor one time that taught us about Tiglath, he spent a lot of time on that. He really dreaded what that man could and did do. He must have been a terrible character. And he's the one that hauled the 10 tribes of Israel off into exile. And when he did it, there was no return, and there's nothing in the Bible, I don't think, about them coming back. And so now we have skipped to Ezra, chapter 4. And this is after Jerusalem fell. And there was a return from Babylon in 537 BC. And so here's what it says. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, who are the enemies of Judah and Benjamin? Well, it's the Samaritans. Why were they the enemies? Well, they are the ones that had separated themselves into another kingdom, Israel, and they were enemies. And not only that, but they had become Samaritans, and I'll explain to you the significance of that. But when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the families, saying, "Let us build with you, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of King Esarhaddon of Syria, who brought us here." That's not the return of those who were exiled to Assyria. Tiglath and his followers had a way of taking people out of the land that was theirs and putting them somewhere else, and then putting them in a land that didn't belong to them, and taking the land that belonged to the other people and putting them in their land. He just swapped out. And he hoped that they would be enemies then, and they wouldn't be his enemy. Well, I don't know how that worked out in time, but I know that these people here are not considered by the Jews to be returning Jews. They are people from these foreign lands who worship these foreign gods. And so in Samaria, they intermarried with the Jews that were left there that weren't exiled. They weren't hauled away. They intermarried with them, and that created a new race of people. And I will tell you that everybody that stayed in the Holy Land after these conquests and exiles became convinced by the word of the prophets that God had caused that because of their rebellion against God and their disobedience. Remember the emphasis that I have placed with you on the covenants that God made with them, that God said, if you obey and serve and do right, then I will bless you. But if you do not, and that gets into what Jacob had on those mountains and the choir up on Mount Ebal saying the curses if they did not obey God. Well, of course, we know that they didn't, and so they were all exiled, but the ones that came back to Samaria were not Jews, and they intermarried with those Jews of Samaria, and they started worshiping God with the Pentateuch, the Torah, the books of Moses, but they would not accept the later books of the Old Testament that the Jews had written. And the Jews that were coming back into exile took the New Testament as we have it. The Samaritans only took the Pentateuch, the books of Moses. Do you all see the difference? Question. But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the other heads of the family of Israel replied, "You have no part with us in building a house for," notice he says, "our God," not your God, our God, "since we alone must build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." Well, they bought their way for King Cyrus to let them go, and they had him right in there that they were commanded to build the temple and nobody else. Then the people of the land, now that's what they call them, the Amha Haaretz, the people of the land, those ignorant idiots that live up there and don't know the law and don't respect God and they're not our race, and on this goes. Then the people of the land set out to discourage the people of Judah and to make them afraid to build. But they hired counselors against them to frustrate their plans throughout the reign of Cyrus, the king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, the king of Persia. Well, y'all ever heard of a lobbyist? Now you know who invented it. So the exiles of the Jewish nations, both Israel and Judah. Here's how it happened. I'll try to make this quick. In 722 BC, Israel fell. That's Samaria, conquered by Assyria. And so the 10 tribes were hauled off. Large numbers were exiled to Assyria beyond the river. There was no return. In 587, you can see that that's a bunch of years after the fall of Israel. Judah fell, conquered by Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. And so Judah, the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, were exiled to Babylon, and this happened in 3 stages. And the first stage was Daniel and his friends. And remember, when they got there, what the book of Daniel, in my opinion, the way I've been taught, is to teach me that the Jews had to learn that God was not just a God of their hill and a God of the box that they had in their temple, in their town, on their mountain. That's what they thought. And when those people got out there, when Daniel and them got out there, the question arose, if God is a God of the box and the hill and the temple and the town and all of that, the mountain, do we have to serve him out here when we're out here in this place under these other gods? And Daniel said, what? We won't eat your food and we won't worship your gods because our God is here now. That's the lesson of the exile. Well, the time came when Ezekiel took a look at Jerusalem and he said, I saw the Spirit of God come up out of the Ark of the Covenant. That's what I call the box. I don't mean to be irreverent. I'm just saying they thought that since they had him in that box, they owned him. And Ezekiel said, I saw him come up out of there and light up on the edge of the temple and look around, and the priests were down in the basement worshiping foreign gods, sacrificing to them, and the women were out on the terrace out there worshiping I believe it was Tammuz, the cow god of the Egyptians, and on this went. And Ezekiel said, and the Spirit of God came out here with us. And so when they came back, they were of the opinion that they had the Spirit of God with them. Did I explain that where you understand it?
Yes.
And so they rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple, and they told the Samaritans to go away. You remember I talked about Alexander the Great and Sanballat? Well, Sanballat is the one that opposed them about building the temple. That's what was afoot about that. They reinstituted the Mosaic law, and this is significant because they were told that you have got to turn away these wives, and I suppose the children that you have had with these foreign wives that you have married, and so now we're one race. Well, do you see up there that I've got my cursor on an underlined phrase that says mixed race? The Samaritans were people of a mixed race and proud of it. And the Jews are only one race, and they're proud of it. And you can't, they're not going to get along, and they don't get along to this day. The Judean exiles returned under the decree of King Cyrus, and you can read about that in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So now I have finally come to Jesus at the well. Jesus in Samaria, John 4:7. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. Do y'all find these footnotes that John gives you interesting? He wants you to know that the disciples are gone And this is the reason why Jesus is alone. And he's also telling me that these folks couldn't worship together, but I've never heard of a Jew that couldn't do business. If y'all, they're good at business. They are world-class businessmen, I mean, to this day. And so they can do business with the Samaritans, and so the disciples are off buying food. So Jesus is sitting by the well at noon, and he's resting from traveling. I guess they were walking on the road. It doesn't say anything about donkeys or wagons here. And he was hungry and thirsty. So the disciples go to Sychar to buy food. And the Samaritan woman comes to draw water from the well. Now, I've made you a note here. Women normally would walk in groups, and they would go for water in the early morning and late in the evening where it was cool. And this woman is out here in the heat of the day, and she's alone. Think about that. And so Jesus is alone, and the woman is alone. And the New Testament doesn't try to hide that from us. That's interesting, wouldn't you say? So he tells the woman, "Give me a drink." Well, there's the well. It's in a church. The Eastern Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox Church, they built this church to Saint Fotini, who they say is the name of the woman at the well. If I didn't miss my guess, I'd say that was a Latin name rather than a Greek name. But anyway, that's who they say that is, and that construction right there is the well cover. And I guarantee you that wasn't there when Jesus was there. It wasn't even there when I was there. I'm going to show you that.
How did she become a saint?
The head of the Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church can bring about a process where anybody they say is made a saint. I mean, how y'all ever heard of St. Augustine, Florida? That was named for Augustine, who translated the Latin Vulgate for the Roman Church, the ancient Greek text into Latin for the Roman Church in their language, which became the Catholic Bible even during the time of the King James. It still is for some people. There's a controversy in the Catholic Church right now about Mass. The recent popes have said it's all right to have Mass in the language of the people where it is. And you've got some people in the church that say, no, Jerome translated it into Latin, and we're going to do it into Latin, and that's your ancient Latin Mass. And they're fighting it out even yet. Well, this is a picture of the city of Nablus as it is today. It's not called by any New Testament names. And Jacob's Well is right down there in the middle of that. And here's the church that they have built over the well. That's the Orthodox Church of San Fotini at Shechem, or Nablus, or Sychar. And here is a priest pouring water from the well into this vessel, and I guess they will do some kind of a washing, a baptism with that water. I don't know. I liked it better, and I think scholars liked it better when a traveler, and it was like that when I came, could go to that well and put down a bucket and get a drink of water, and it's still good to this day. There's the well as it was when I was there. That's Dr. Brown. Wherever we went, we had these scholars tell us about the place, and it always drew people that were curious. And so I don't know who that young fella is there, but Dr. Brown's pointing up on Mount Gerizim, and so he's telling him something about it. But y'all dig that picture of the well? I like it better than that other than myself.
Did you say they built that recently, around that?
I don't know when they built it, but I was there over 30 years ago, and it's between now and then.
What year did you go, Brother Hunter?
You asked me a question from my memory, and it's
81, I think. 81.
81. I have an authority here that was left at home with 2 babies when I went, and so she can tell you. we had twin boys, and I abandoned them to do this. And y'all, she can't appreciate it, but y'all can appreciate that I went over and did this so I could just sit here and tell you all about it and show you my picture. And so this is Shechem, and Nablus is out there, and that's the two mountains. Ebal is on the right, and Gerizim is on the left, and this is a view that Jesus would have had, and that well and all is right down there in the middle of those in the valley. So Jesus asked for a drink. And John tells you the disciples had gone, you see in verse 8, his disciples had gone into the town to buy food. And so now, Jesus is, picture this. Jesus is not afraid to talk to a woman out there in the wilderness, and that's about what it was. It was out of the settlement. And the woman is not afraid to talk to him. Y'all get the picture there? That's kind of unusual. You're a Jew, said the woman. How can you ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? And John put another one of his footnotes in there for you. For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Well, they sure do buy food from them, but they don't associate with them. Any questions about this so far?
How did she know he was a Jew?
That's a good question, Jim. And apparently, he had an accent like the Jews, or he dressed like the Jews, or something or another. But she could tell, and that's an interesting fact about this. That's a question that John doesn't answer. But you could recognize a Jew from a Samaritan. I'll show you a picture of some of them in a minute. You're a Jew, said the woman. How can you ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Well, this you're a Jew business means that she recognizes who he is. And she also recognizes that there's this conflict between me and you. And the conflict went back to Ezra's time, which I told you, and it was based on discrimination, as well as the fact that there were two different kingdoms, and then you had all these other people that moved in, and a difference in the religion, and so forth. But discrimination it was, and notice that Jesus hasn't got any enemies here, and he is not discriminating against anybody. And the woman really is not discriminating against him. The Samaritans were excluded by the Jews, and so the Samaritans up and built their own temple on Gerizim. And of course the Jews didn't like that. The rabbis had these rules that they made. You remember me talking to you about how zealous. And they built a fence around the law, where if you tried to obey all their rules, you couldn't break the 10 Commandments. And so you had all these nitpicking rules that were short of breaking the law. So you could be saved by doing good or not breaking the commandment, as long as you didn't, you were just an ordinary sinner, but if you broke the commandment, that was bad. So the rabbis made these rules, and one of the rules was that a Jew could not share any kind of a vessel or a drinking cup or a plate with the Samaritans. You couldn't eat with them, you couldn't drink with them, or anything like that. And so Jesus is breaking that by saying, give me a drink. And I wonder if the woman knew that. She probably did. Don't you think the Samaritans were authorities on the insults that they got? No good Jew would speak to any woman in a public place, not even his wife. Did y'all know that one? I mean, that's the fence around the Torah. You don't want to sin. And so we'll talk to those women in private when we get them home. And we won't talk to them in public. Especially would they not speak to a Samaritan woman, much less. If a man won't speak to his own wife in public, do you think he'll address a Samaritan? And then what is this about not drinking from her cup? Oh, a Samaritan? So she said, how can you ask? And I think that's a mighty good question for her to have been asking. Y'all agree with that? Well, I'll tell you that Jesus knew how to talk to people wherever they were, whenever he met them, whoever they were. Jesus could deal with anybody. Now, what's this about asking for a drink? Even an enemy woman would have a hard time in her conscience refusing a drink to a thirsty stranger. Y'all follow that one? So he appealed to her goodness. And then he appealed to her curiosity. And so she's curious. What kind of a Jew are you to ask me a question like that? And so she wants to know just what kind of a fellow are you anyway? Well, I'm reminding you there of the last statement that the Jews and Samaritans could do business, they just couldn't get along. And so Jesus answered her in response to her generosity and her response of curiosity, asking questions. He said, if you knew the gift of God and who, there's that who question coming up. She was certainly wanting to know what kind of a fellow are you, and he said, if you knew who is asking you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. So there's a Jew who amazed the woman when he asked her for a favor, and he had thirst. And I'm thirsty. Well, Jesus could meet us according to our earthly needs in common with those, but he could bring up also about our spiritual needs, which he did. So she's agreeable to talk. Do you think that she knew how to talk to men? Well, I'll leave out a discussion about that. But she had a curiosity. In the following conversation, all these social and religious barriers got crossed by Jesus and that woman. She was crossing barriers talking to him. She was forbidden what she was doing as well as he was forbidden by others to do what he was doing. It was race. And the Samaritans were considered half-breeds and therefore low class. And then you had the man versus the woman thing. The male dominance, the women were inferior, they were kept in their place. You don't even want to talk to one of them in public. And then the Jewish versus the Samaritan worship. And that was an argument not over other things, but it had to do with the place. You remember the Jews said, we got the place and you can't come there. And the Samaritans said, we've got the place and you don't want to come here. Well, there was history, which I've tried to emphasize. Discrimination, conflict. The exiles were excluding the Samaritans even till the time of Jesus. And that's how many years? Over 500, nearly 600 years they had been fighting this out since the return of the exiles. And so the Samaritan temple up on Mount Gerizim, I showed you a picture of the ruins, and the Jews destroyed it in 127 or 128 BC. And so Jesus answered her question perfectly good sense. If she knew who it was, she'd ask him for a favor. If you knew, well, she's paying attention. The gift of God. Jesus assumed that she understood that there was the gift of God. Do you see that Jesus gave her credit as a Samaritan for knowing about the gift of God? The Samaritans knew the Torah, as I told you, and he knew she could understand. And about who is asking you for a drink. Well, if you knew, well, her curiosity means that she is going to find out who this is. He's asking a favor, a drink of water, and who is asking? Well, she's going to find out. So you would have asked him, and now she's being offered a favor. He would have given you living water. Well, what is that? Living water is what was at the bottom of Jacob's well. Now, any of y'all understand that? Anybody here understand what I just said? That well was dug down a little over 100 feet to the bedrock coming off of that mountain. And it was a flowing stream down there. It was a fountain, they called it, down at the bottom of that well. And then the reason you didn't have to have 100 feet of rope is because that water would build up in the well and stand higher than the bottom. Well, the gushing water, the living water, they called it, was down at the bottom of that well. And so this water that you get with your bucket has been there a long time, and you might say it was stagnant water, but it was still water. You understand how I explain that now? Any question? The living water is way deep in the well. Well, she's thinking, see question 5 down there, I would have given you living water. She thinks of physical water, earthly things, and so her questions are about earthly things. This is exactly like the conversation with Nicodemus went. Remember that? Well, all these conversations that Jesus has, the people start off asking him questions about earthly things, and he leads them to heavenly things to satisfy their curiosity. And he has certainly raised their curiosity when he says, I can give you the living water. Well, she's thinking, Sir, she replies, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where then will you get this living water? Well, it's over 100 feet down there, and she knew it. And Jesus didn't have a thing, so it's a legitimate question about earthly things. Sir, would you say that shows respect for a Jew? I'd say so. Talking. Well, she's curious, asking questions. The point is, she is thinking. You have nothing to draw with. Well, that's a fact, and it was true, and she's using logic on him. Living water. Well, I told you what that is. The well is deep, and you don't have a rope. Jacob was great. He and his many people dug this well. Can you do better than that? Are you better than our father Jacob, who gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock? So she's asking him the who question. Who are you? She's getting more curious. Are you greater than our father Jacob? Notice she says, our father. Well, the Jews say, that ain't your father. All those foreigners that came in there are your fathers. Well, that's a not. He gave us this well. That's us. We have it. We're the true sons of Abraham. You don't have it. That's a not. Jacob was a great and powerful man, so she's asking him, are you? That's a not. Jacob drank from this well. Can you? Well, that's a not. He drank himself, his sons, and his livestock. Living water. Can you? You're a Jew, a stranger, and you got no bucket. So you can? And that's a not. So where will you get this living water? Show me. And that's a not. I'm going to have to take this up next week as we have come to the closing time. And I hope that I have raised your curiosity about earthly things and heavenly things, and we'll continue this conversation with the woman next week. Thank you. Now,
I'm glad to know about the difference between the water and the living water. I've never heard that before. I'd heard about the living water, but I thought it was in the well, that she thought it was in the well. But you had to get to the bottom of the well to get the living water.
you remember in the 23rd Psalm, it says, he leads me beside the still waters. Well, sheep won't drink from living water, flowing water.
Yeah.
So they got to drink from still water. And you might take an analogy here that to Jesus, the people in the church are the sheep of his pasture, and we're in the habit of drinking still water, but he gives living water. Why don't we teach that?
Shepherds would dig a place out around that running water and let it in there so the sheep would drink.
That's right. That's the difference between the living water and the still water.
Thank you.
Any other questions?